Whoop-oh! Oh, is that the juices flowing, right? Blood pumping, fists going.
Ready.
Ray, order a vodka tonic. Vodka Red Bull.
Rev it up.
All right, I'll be honest. Did anybody used to do bourbon Red Bulls back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
Bourbon Red Bull.
I mean, Blake, you keep talking on mute, buddy. You got to take yourself off if you want to do that. But
he's been drinking vodka Red Bulls.
Yeah. Say it again, Blake. You were cutting out there.
Oh, yeah, no, never drank bourbon Red Bull. More than I want to admit on the vodka Red Bulls, though. You know, I thought that was like the cool thing. College, coming out of college, like, yep, we've made it. Let's drink a vodka Red Bull. So the bourbon Red Bull, I think, was a Kentucky thing.
I guess it might have been, because at least in the fraternity that I was in, it was always bourbon and Cokes for pretty much every single time you went out in the bars and stuff like that. And then, you know, this is also way back when energy drinks started going, you know, 2002 to 2004 kind of era, stuff like that. And so all of a sudden, you know, that's kind of when the vodka Red Bull train started. But we did basically bourbon Red Bulls. Honestly, if you mix bourbon and ginger ale and you mix bourbon and Red Bull, it's not a hard like line to cross. It actually works pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only one way to find out. I'll go grab a Red Bull real quick. How much time we got?
Do that, do 20 push-ups and start punching yourself in the face, and looks like you're ready to go for the evening.
I'm going to get a Red Balls, not Red Bull.
Red Balls.
Chappelle's show. Bad joke.
Yep. Swing and a miss for the People's Champ on that one, huh?
That's right.
You're canceled, Ryan. Sorry. Can't all hit
talk about Chappelle.
100%. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get it kicked off here. We got a lot of good topics. I already got them kind of lined up and ready to go. Like I said, we got two kind of main topics. If we get to the third one, great. If not, I think that'll be okay. I kind of want to wait for the third one only because I think Fred would have a lot to add for the third one because he's been in the game a little bit longer than us. So I feel that we could probably eat up a solid 45 minutes with the first two, if that's all right with you all.
Let's
Sounds
see where it
good.
takes us.
All right. Let's see where the conversation goes, my friends. All right.
A lot of Ross and Squib talk, I'm sure. coming up.
If we don't get more Ross and Squib talk, then the internet's not going to be the same. We just need to just keep pushing it out there because they're failing at marketing, and we are definitely helping them.
I'm trying right here.
There you go. I mean, it is a solid hat.
Who's
there's
MGP?
never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
All right. Blake's about to hawk up a lung over there. At least he's learned how to mute himself. So let's go ahead. Let's get started.
That's what happens when you get vodka and Red Bull.
He's just his
All
body's
this
not
vodka
used to
Red
it.
Bull talk, it just got me excited.
He's already sweating.
Love it. Now here we go. Welcome everybody. We are back with Bourbon Community Roundtable number 70. Yes, we've done this for a few years now, so we know what we're doing, but we've got a good potpourri of topics. This is always one of the most favorite podcasts that we love to be able to do, one of those epic shows, only because we have to invite our good friends here and kind of talk about the soup du jour. What are the hot topics of things that I've been able to conjure up in the past 24 hours that we can kind of talk about? But there's always a good mix of things that we can dive into. And of course, Ryan's here. Fred's out this week because he's coming back from St. Lucia. He's actually went on PTO for once and actually put his out of office on. So he didn't respond to emails, which is very, very rare for somebody that's an entrepreneur. I know, Ryan, it's probably hard for you to turn your out of office on every once in a while as well.
Yeah, I've done that, and then you quickly realize like they just build up even more, and it creates for a worse like time to try to catch up from all the stuff you put on hold. But it definitely didn't slow down Fred's Instagram account, though. I mean, I think he tripled down on what he used to do in emails. He made up for Instagram stories. So no, I'm glad he had a good time. It looked like he had an awesome time with his family, and I've never been to St. Lucia, but it looks really nice.
I think he actually picked a few rum barrels while I was there, if I'm not mistaken, too.
Yeah, I think I saw that too. So hopefully we he shares those with us one day. Probably not.
Who knows? We'll find out. We'll see if he's a real part of this trio. If not,
That's
we'll
right.
We'll have to boot him out somehow. Vote him off the island, if you will.
Yep.
All right, but before we get into it, we've got our usual crew here. So let's go ahead and start with a quick round of introductions. So we'll start with the person to my right here, which is Nick from Breaking.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here. Good to see you guys again. Nick from Breaking Bourbon here. Check us out on Breaking Bourbon. And look, man, I'm going to start by saying I am drinking some of Blake's Seal Box, his first Seal Box mix here, which I have not had in a while.
Nice.
So enjoying that tonight. Hopefully everybody has a glass in hand, and looking forward to the show.
I'm actually looking forward to the Seal Box remix coming up, which is that champagne finish one you got kind of going on. Blake,
Yeah.
let's talk about that one, man.
I'm still waiting on the first one.
So, oh, that's true. I do owe you a bottle. I started getting better about that. But so batch 3 will be, and it's not just like randomly selected finishes. So the Sealbach cocktail, for those who don't know, because it's not my favorite cocktail either, it's
So it's
Kentucky.
a better reason to come out with a huge release. of it.
Yeah. Well, we did it better. We recreated it in a good way. So the Sealbach cocktail it's Kentucky bourbon, triple sec bitters, and then topped with champagne. So what we did was we got a Kentucky bourbon blend. So there's 4-year. It ends up being 10 months old, 4-year, 10 months, and then a 15-year-old barrel blended together, and then we put that in triple sec barrels and champagne barrels and blended it all back together. So it was actually a lot of fun to see. You know, triple sec is one that's kind of slowly rolling out at a few places, but both triple sec and champagne you don't see a lot, and so it's cool to kind of play around with. And yeah, I think it turned out well, so I'm excited.
I'll be quite honest with you. I didn't know that triple sec went in barrels until I saw this release.
Well, so there's a couple of things on that. So there are very few
Oh,
producers
here we
that
go.
No, there are
here's
very
some
few
flavor
producers.
packets.
Add the
being thrown in.
No,
asterisks.
it's not. No.
There's
I
asterisks
have-
all over behind Blake.
I have
Blake there.
the asterisk. The asterisk is only on the champagne. So yes, it is still wine that goes into a barrel to age in the Champagne region, and then it becomes champagne because it's not carbonated or sparkling in the barrel. So I think I took a hit for that on Twitter, but we admit to it. It is wine that is becoming champagne. But the triple sec is there just are a few producers that do use barrel aging, massive 60-gallon barrels. So
Is it the Kuiper? Is that one of the ones?
they actually
No.
wouldn't tell me. Yeah, they apparently non-disclosure agreements happen in the liqueur and wine world as well, because he was like, well, if you know your champagnes, you could probably figure it out. I'm like, well, good news, I don't. So I will not be able to figure it out.
Like, mystery is going to remain.
Yeah. If anybody out there knows champagne well, it's I forget the part of champagne, but not a ton of people using Pinot Meunier or whatever the third varietal of grapes that can be used in champagne. So not a ton of people using that, but yeah, well, maybe that'll be my research. Yeah.
Well, the Pinot Meunier, I'm going to have you stand in for me on This Week in Bourbon. And every time I need some sort of French word that needs to be spoken.
Oh, I'm definitely probably saying it wrong, but
I butcher them every time. So that's what I need, somebody right there. All right. Well, thank there, Blake. And Brian, wrap it up here for us.
Yeah, happy to be on number 70. Brian with Sippin' Corn. Find me there and at Bourbon Justice, all the socials. Excited to hear more about Blake's new concoction. And I've got one particular line on the article that we're talking about that I've circled and underlined. I'm ready for this one.
Oh, nice.
Excited.
I like it. Well, with Blake's thing, we're going to kind of save that for the second half of the show because we'll talk about finished bourbons. But the top of the show, I kind of want to talk about this. It was a great article that came out by VinePair recently, and it was titled, "An American Whiskey is Heritage Everything." And the one thing we all love to talk about here is bourbon and marketing and how they really all kind of come together. And honestly, how marketing is really 50% of the battle half the day. So in this article is by Julia Bauer. She says that in American whiskey, marketing is about as old as some brands claim to be. And then history always seems to be at the front and center. And that could be coming from prohibition, or there's just some lineage or family genes that go into distilling. Colin Spillman, the co-founder and head distiller of Brooklyn's Kings County Distillery, he said that the reason I got interested in distilling in the first place is because I noticed that in Kentucky, there's a lot of storytelling around history, but none of it had any credibility. And it was largely these giant corporations, many of them not even based in the United States, that misunderstand their own brands. And that article goes on to talk about that Van Winkle's not needing any marketing, Uncle Nearest and its roots, how Bardstown Bourbon Company is creating the modern, authentic bourbon experience. So I kind of want to break this down into a few questions. And the first one is taken directly from the article. And that is to talk about, without history, is there a story to tell? So I'll kind of put it out to the group. So when you start thinking about the brands that you kind of see and the story that you kind of have to know about, what resonates more? Is it the ones that have a history and the story, or ones that can kind of maybe conjure something up out of what they're doing right now?
Well, I think that's what we're seeing with the consumer diving more into the details of the actual production. There's a lot of different ways to tell a story, and that's kind of been center of what we do at Sealbox. Is like, hey, we don't need some made up historic thing to sell bourbon. Like, we can talk about how old it is, the mash bill, the blending processes, the distillation, how column stills are different than pot stills, how aging in a single level warehouse is different than aging in a 9-level warehouse. So I think the options are actually endless. Nobody just was, I don't want to say they weren't creative enough, but they didn't have to think outside the box on a lot of that. And now you've got people like Bardstown Bourbon Company, New Riff, Castle and Key, all these. I mean, even Castle and Key brings out the kind of the history, but they talk a lot about their process. So I think it's just, what people are into today. They want to dive deeper, and kind of what Colin said in that article where, these things go in about 25 or 20 to 25 year cycles. And so I think we've got a long way to go of people just caring more about the production process, the blending process, without even caring whether it was the first distillery in that town of since Prohibition or something. So I mean, I love that kind of stuff, and I think it is more important for what you're tasting.
Yeah. So I gotta say, there's when you think about the competition for people's attention, there's a lot of different ways to get that, and I think history is one of them. And you see the bigger brands with a lot of money that can put a lot behind that history, and if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it's there. But at the end of the day, I think it's getting people's attention. That's the important thing. And if you get their attention with a good product or just an interesting story, even if it's newer. I mean, I kind of thinking of a couple. High West is one that comes to mind. I've actually kind of come away from their story a little bit, but back in kind of the Dave Perkins days, they were doing some interesting things that really kind of drew me to them and what they were doing with blending that was kind of unique at the time. And now if you enter, I think if you enter the space, everything seems new and everything kind of seems, like it has some kind of history. You don't really realize right away, you don't really necessarily know who, E.H. Taylor is or George T. Stagg. You just know that's something that's very hard to get, in that sense. And it's not until you kind of dig deeper and deeper and deeper that the history kind of emerges. And then you do the deep dives, like, and I'm looking forward to what Brian has to say on this, because I know he's got some really insightful things. He's done some really deep dives on the history, but that's kind of like the layers you start peeling back that, yeah, at some point with some of the brands that don't have it, you're going to kind of reach the end of the layers and it comes to just the people that are there and the product that's there. I think that's okay. There's only so many historic distilleries out there. So, some people just have to make their own history.
You're right, Nick. I mean, to lean in that to just a little bit more, you think about Buffalo Trace, what they do. That particular grounds have seen what decades of basically concrete going on top of it, digging it up, and then like, oh my God, there's a whole other distillery underneath here, right? So they have a lot of stories that they can tell just surrounding the history. They've got the people that are on the labels. I mean, you said Colonel Taylor, Elmer T. Lee, Blanton. I mean, all these people that were able to sort of be the names and the people that they're trying to be around. So at that point, people are kind of gravitating toward it. They gravitate towards the name, and that means that there's a history behind it. So it's really hard for them to sit there and say like, "Oh, we're building the modern bourbon," because a lot of the stuff that they're doing is all based in history. So I look at that and I say, yes, they lean in on that because there's a story to tell, and people that want to go, you get a good history lesson while you're at it. And I know that Ryan and we've talked about this in an episode that we did for Behind the Pursuit, kind of talking about, well, if you're an NDP per se, you don't really have much of a story to tell. Like for us, like we don't have a story to tell. So how do we create that story? Or how do we create that experience that people can kind of gravitate towards? And it does get a little bit harder if you don't have the history aspect, because that is something that people are looking at. They want to see exactly, oh, this has been around for X number of years. It was lost during Prohibition. It came back. There's a romanticized aspect to it that it's really hard for others to kind of gravitate towards. And so I feel that you are in a better position when you do have some sort of historical significance that you can rest on, because you just have it in your kind of back pocket, because somebody's great granddaddy had the recipe to whatever, and then all of a sudden there's a different source that's in there. It doesn't matter. There's the story that is still connecting at the end of the day. And to just kind of finish this thought as well, is you have to start thinking about how does that modern brand start changing the consumer aspect, and they have to really take it in a much different direction. Bardstown Bourbon Company is a great example because they don't lean on the history. They lean on creating that authentic modern experience. Personally, you look at Willet, a lot of us, we all know that Willet has a history, but if you go to Willet, they don't sit there and tell you all about the history. And, there might be a little bit of the history that's on the tour, but it's really not about that. People care about their bourbon today, not what they had built over, decades or anything like that. So I think they're a little bit more, I guess you can say, falling into the BBC realm more or less so than the sort of the history realm.
Yeah, but they were built on some whiskey with some fantastic history, and that's where they kind of got their lore from Willet, into it's one of those scarcity things. There's just not much to go around, and people love scarcity, and they also love connection, and that's what we're in a connection economy. Seth Godin says, and whatever consumers can connect to, whether that's history or you know get fascinated with the process or the blenders or the sourcing of it. There's something you have to find that connects with consumers that's true, transparent, authentic. Not that it's something that's made up, because you can have a cool history, but then, if you're whiskey and you get lucky and you source some really good old barrels, for your first release, but then you don't, you run out of those, and then you're scrambling and you're coming out with a 4 to 5 year old whiskey and you're playing on that history again. I just don't think it's going to connect, moving forward. But I think that's why, you talk about the historical side. I think that's why Bardstown Bourbon Company really went after Green River, because not only from the contract side, but Green River has that romantic DSP number 5. I think it's 5. Um, it has that historical pre-prohibition, cool old looking bottle. Like it's something that they can like really, pay homage to Kentucky, the history of Kentucky whiskey and bourbon. Whereas, their new brand it's really connecting with collaborations and working with different industries, trying to like break into, the wine industry, or the wine drinkers or beer drinkers or this or that, really trying to like find, those fringes and bring them as new consumers in other products. And so it's really about building connection, but having that history helps, but it only gets you so far. You got to have the good whiskey in the bottle and continue to deliver on results, in that way.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a shout out to OITD that said Willett's history is built on egg salad sandwiches, because that was a
That's-
pretty awesome comment.
That's very true.
Yeah.
But and that's, I think we're moving that way, but kind of like Ryan said, you can't lose track of the fact that people do like that side of things. You look at Green River and their packaging looks phenomenal, and it sells bottles and it's good marketing. So I think it's a balance. So, Brian, go ahead and give us the right answer.
Well,
and
no.
That's right.
Not the right answer. Just
We saved the
some
best for
Brown's take
last.
on it. So history as motivation for marketing has actually been a little bit of a roller coaster, because it didn't matter early on at all how historical you were, because things had sucked in the old days. And then you got into this whole marketing idea where things had to be made the old way. They had to be hand stirred, and you needed a pot still, and you didn't like the new column still. And then Prohibition hits, and it's all, marketing's out the window. But fast forward to current day infatuation with history, that really didn't start until Woodford Reserve released its first bottle in '96 or something along that time frame. Before then, think of the ads. Everything was trying to be new. They were trying to turn to in the '70s to light whiskey. All the old Crow ads were kind of dispensing with their legitimate history, and they were trying to be, competition to light blended Scotch and those sorts of things. So history didn't really come back into the fold until '96, and then when Woodford did it so spectacularly, that's why everybody thought, hey, we need history too. And that's why Ridgewood Reserve came out of became a legend overnight from marketers, making things up to sound like you had history. And that's when E.H. Taylor, remember, wasn't a popular brand at the time. It was bottom shelf. There was no such thing as Stag. Buffalo Trace was using current names. They were using the Blanton name and using the Elmer T. Lee name. They weren't going back to the long history that they had on that property until it kind of turned. So that's really, I think, a phenomenon for the last 25 years, is this push for history. Now I love it because I'm a history nerd and I like digging into that history, and I've taken as deep of a dive as anyone into that history, but I think it's relatively new. So I like this switch in the last maybe 3 years. People like Blake coming on. We've got Foregate and this will get into finishing later too, but they're doing inventive things with their bourbon, and they don't have a story, and they're not trying to make up some story. I think what we led into with Woodford's popularity is everyone tried to make up a story, and some of them just don't have it. And the truth is, you don't always need a story like that. That's my 2 cents on that.
As in, you don't need a story as in history, or you just need a story in general? Kind of.
I thought, well, you need a story in general for sure. You need something to say about how what you do is innovative or different, or whatever it is that you're doing. You've got to tell that story. I don't think you need a historical story, and I think that's what BBC and New Riff and Peerless. I think that's what they're all finding and they're embracing. I know for a while Peerless tried to say that they weren't shut down during Prohibition and they had all this nonsense. But I think they've distanced themselves from that now. So I like to see, despite loving the historical side of it, that people are realizing you don't need that historical story.
And even if you look at, say, Bardstown Bourbon Company, for example, the experience, they have the vintage library, where
Yeah.
you can get that connection. Out for Pursuit Palooza, for example, on the way to Bardstown, I stopped at a few distilleries, just swung through, and Bardstown was packed by comparison. A lot of people there, lively attitude, lively energy. They built that on purpose. I mean, they designed that to have that experience in a very modern way. So you have these old kind of historic distilleries and historic facilities that were built for production. They weren't built for today's experience.
Yeah.
And that's why we're seeing these massive expansions and people basically building out what Bardstown did from the beginning, because they're seeing that, yeah, the history is great and it helps project the brand and that lets you peel back the layers, like Buffalo Trace has. But at the same time, they want to draw in consumers. They want people to be there and to visit, and it's an arms race to be, to get people to go to your distillery when they visit Kentucky and experience that, so that when they go and when they go home and a month later, a year later, whatever, they still feel connected to the brand when they go to the store. It's interesting. I went to a weekend bachelor party with a group of guys over the weekend. I brought like 16 bottles with me and I put them all out and I was like, just look at the bottles. Like, which one of those like draws your attention? And I was surprised what was kind of unanimous, and it happened to be a taller bottle and it looked a certain way, but it was the one that drew the attention. I was like, that's interesting, because that's not something I usually think of. And it was a group of guys that they don't really drink too much bourbon. And I'm thinking they're going to stores and seeing hundreds of things on the shelves, and which one of those things is going to draw their eye and which one's going to draw them in. And then a lot of times when they do drink something and find it, they'll kind of stick with the same thing. They're not going to explore as much as somebody like I do, or somebody like you guys or the folks listening do in that sense too. So there's a lot of brand captivity you want to get with people. History helps, but I think there's a lot of ways to do it.
And I think history too, and you kind of see this with like beer or like wine, history and like, and being like an everyday brand can also hurt you too, because I can't tell how many times people come here and, they're like, well, I don't want to go to Heaven Hill, or I don't want to go to Makers. I want to go somewhere unique, somewhere new, somewhere fresh, somewhere cool, that people don't know about. What's the next hot and upcoming thing? And it's like, okay, and
Jim
that's
Beam. It's right down the road. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Haven't heard of her. Yeah.
And so you kind of have, that angle as well, as like how there's an opportunity, if you don't have that history, to be, kind of that, mom and pop, uh, a smaller brand that people can connect to as well, not just this big behemoth. I think of like my worst wine tour was Cake Bread, at Napa, because it was like this big factory, everybody's there, it just wasn't that like intimate. But my favorite wine experiences were the small, intimate ones where you got to meet the the purveyors and the winemakers and this and that. And I don't know. So there's opportunities too if you don't have that, the big name recognition in history as well.
In history, though, it's like a drug for a lot of these distillers. They can't keep away from making up their history, and that's actually what I had circled in this article. I thought the article was great. I mean, mostly around the edges, there are a few issues, but the thing that I circled is under the title of Making Up History. So kind of the topic we're on. And Preston is supposedly telling them, and this article is reiterating, that Pappy has had 4 generations of bourbon making in Frankfort, Kentucky. Can anyone say that's true? I mean, 100% false, right?
Bourbon
Absolutely, 100% false.
blending ish.
No.
Is it the
Four
making or is it the
generations of-
Louisville part? Because both of them are false.
4 generations of bourbon making in Frankfort, Kentucky. False.
And to be clear, they didn't move to Frankfurt until 02. What was the right?
Yeah. I forget which year it was, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Their most famous award-winning one, of course, was Stutzel Weller. So it's, I mean, not to knock what they are putting out, but why stretch when you've got the name recognition like Pappy? Why do you have to tell someone and get it printed in an article that you're 4 generations of bourbon making? Those sons of bitches aren't making bourbon; they're sourcing it.
I think one of my favorite distillery tours, and I won't reveal who it was, but it was I was with a group of buddies, and the guy doing the tour just kept saying, and as far as I know, we are the only one to do this, and as far as I know, we're the only one to do X, Y, and Z. And finally my brother looks at me and goes, if I preface everything with as far as I know, I can just say whatever I want after that. Yeah, and that's kind
a lot of gray area.
Yeah, like what a lot of if you go on tours, and there's nothing wrong with major brands. I love them. I love a lot of what they produce, but everyone's the first one to distill since Prohibition, or the longest distilling company, or whatever it is. But it's like I think the consumer's just not chasing that as much anymore. It's still important. It still plays a role for sure. Like, I don't think we'll ever lose that lore and kind of folksiness, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that's what consumers care as much about. While it was 100% 5-10 years ago, it's at like 60-70% now.
It is great. Like Nick talked about, there's literally, I was having this conversation with Herb from Bardstown Bourbon Company. And he's like, so many people tell us, because he's in charge of their sales. And he's like, you have the easiest job in the world. You get to sell bourbon and it just sells. And he goes, and he pointed at the bar and he said, look how many bottles are up there. They're all different. How do I go and tell someone that mine's better than the 200 that are up there? And that's what you got to figure out. And there's some things that work for some brands and some, it's you just got to find what's your niche and hope people latch on. But creating that user experience, I think, where people can come in, see you, see how you do things is really important, I think, and can help grow a brand astronomically versus just, as we're learning, being an internet brand that, you try to, just, I don't know. It's I think having a experience can go a long way for a brand and building that connection.
Well, I mean, your connection though is you guys. I mean, that's the connection that's the end, is that you have the connection through the podcast, and through your connections in Kentucky and people, and so that's where, like, Pursuit Palooza, I mean, that's the connection, seeing you guys talk about it. That's where you get that, so that's what works for you guys. You don't need, the story of somebody's great grandfather who discovered bourbon while he was sleeping. I mean, you've got it right through the connection with people. So I think it works in some ways, the history, because it is something that people can kind of relate to in a broad stroke, and you can kind of spread that pretty far. Whereas a lot of brands now, they're looking for a closer, tighter connection. If they have a loyal following, it works because there are so many and there's so much demand for it that you don't need to sell to everybody. You just need to find a big enough crowd and a big enough audience that feels connected to what you're doing, and that can work.
Yeah, I will say Al Young and Jim Rutledge did sign my grandfather's retirement. He was my grandfather was a maintenance man for Four Roses for
We have a
30
history
years.
connection.
So they wrote on his retirement barrelhead. So I do have some history that I probably won't use for our brand, but I'm just kidding.
Exactly. I mean, don't use it for the brand. You guys got the celebrity, and I mean, you guys are all doing the approach where it's personable and it's innovative. So I like to see that change from you guys and everyone else.
As far as I know, this is the greatest roundtable by far. So we'll just start there. But there's also a good part that was in here that kind of talked about how the stories are being made up by people that aren't even being close to the brands. And I actually had an opportunity today I was doing a private barrel selection over at Maker's Mark. Had a chance to sit there and talk to Jane Bowie and Denny Potter, and we were just kind of just talking shop about different things. And they kind of talked about how they are sort of a go-between, kind of between the bean counters, the ones that are looking to say, okay, well, if we did this, we could probably shave till $10 million off a year if we just, raised our proof level or we changed to this type of grain. And those are the ones that have to kind of be the guardians of the brand, because there's a lot of people that are in between, not just inside the distillery, but outside up to the top levels of the corporate marketing, that are trying to influence, actually change what's happening. Not only just changing the product, but they're trying to change the story at the same exact time too. So they are trying to also create, as Brian alluded to earlier, those are the ones that are interjecting a little bit of false history into a lot of these things, trying to figure out what is the angle that we can play on. I think the greatest angle that we can look at to marketing is all the recent Booker's batches, because there is just like something that it's like, oh, it's an oven, or it's like this thing that they're just trying to like latch onto. And they're just creating a history that people are just getting riled up about Booker's batches. I think that's probably the new wave that I've seen in just the Booker's side alone, of just trying to find something that people can sort of latch onto, and kind of find a reason to go out and talk about it some more.
I do like those. I am fat. I mean, I'm a sucker for those. I love the Booker batches. I think they work well, and I love trying the different ones. And because it's a local thing, and Booker knew so many people I know. Like the last couple have been people I know, so it's like I got to go get one, to support them. But I do appreciate those. It's people, and people just love, they were smart to do that, because it not only now it took Booker's from being, a huge, those batches are probably, I don't know, 50,000 bottles, and they reduced them down to smaller, and people, it just made them more scarce, doing those batch numbers, and people love scarcity. And it was brilliant on their part to do that, to make those stories, connections, and kind of give it each batch a little rarity. Whereas before, Booker's was like a 60 to 70,000 bottle batch, each year.
It's kind of taking the concept of single barrels and just expanding it. Each single barrel has some kind of very small, tight, group that somehow feels connected with it. And they're just taking that, saying, well, we have to take that on a bigger scale. So we're doing a batch that's kind of deliver that same unique experience in a larger and more marketable type of way.
Cecil, can you get us a Roundtable batch?
Yes.
I think Blake's the only one that's actually
Blake-
been on a selection.
Yeah,
He's the
I
one
know,
at the
right?
inside that we need to.
I will never not buy a Booker's batch. That's the one that like got me really hooked into bourbon. Love everything about it. Snuck into a Roundtable pick, and yeah, they will not be doing a bourbon Roundtable pick anytime soon, I don't think.
Not if I keep talking about their marketing, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well,
I'll text Freddie after the show.
That's one.
See
Even
we
if they
can-
said, Blake, we hate you, I'd still go out and buy Booker's tomorrow, just because I do like it that much.
Freddie is a fan of Pursuit United, so maybe I can bribe him with a few more bottles.
let's do it. Whatever it takes.
For sure. I think to kind of wrap up this section, we feel that I think it's pretty unanimous that there's got to be some level of between, and you've got to figure out how does your brand really lean on something. If you have that connection of history and you can prove it, and it's not made up, or it doesn't seem like so far fetched, I think that's something that you could probably really work on as an angle, versus something that if you're coming up into this and you're trying to figure out how do we create an experience where a couple people that were buying barrels were trying to create a brand and try to create a label, were whiskey enthusiasts. How do you kind of create that story? And so you've got to figure out a way that you don't lean on that, but instead you kind of lean on that modern experience that maybe is focused not just around the history, but it's around process, it's around taste, it's around sensory, it's around these different kinds of aspects that is more about the whiskey rather than the history of it. And I just kind of give a shout out to Brandy here, because she kind of put a good example and says that the history can pull you in, but the master distiller can kind of keep you following. And so there's always a great example of people at pretty much every major distillery that become the face of the brand. Those are the ones that, at least for us whiskey geeks, that we follow and we kind of hang on every word that they're saying, whether it's in press releases or whether it's batches that they're releasing or whether it's kind of the products that they're working on. And we kind of look at that and as them sort of being gospels and spokespeople of the particular brand. And maybe you don't need the history. Maybe you just need that spokesperson. So I guess that's a good question for you all, is that if you don't have the history, do you just need a spokesperson for your brand to kind
Yes.
of be that person that is the face of it?
Totally. You need Ross and Squibb. You need two people to build your history. They give you the good whiskey and the good branding and the history.
and the jokes can't stop at that point.
Yes. I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
Okay. But it's a question for you all. I mean, do you feel that there needs to be a face for the brand, or is it something that maybe the whiskey can just kind of speak on its own? Is there a good example of that?
Ooh.
I think we do need a face. You need a connection, and maybe it's not a face, maybe it's a story, but there's always outliers with anything. But yeah, I mean, I think you got to have that person that you kind of look to, you listen, you follow on, or at least that's the easiest route to do it, to make a connection with the customer. I mean, I'm just kind of going through my head of all the distilleries that I really like, and usually there's a face connected to that.
I just picked up where I started here, some Blade and Bow. There's really nobody that's a face of Blade and Bow by any means. They've got some brand ambassadors, but it's one of those brands as well that you typically don't have that. Let's say the Bardstown Bourbon Company side. I think the only people that we kind of know about are the ones that we talk about, but they're not necessarily the ones that are always out there. They're not. It's not a Freddie No by any means, right? So I think there's it's kind of counterbalance there.
Well, two
It's hard.
different tools in the tool belt. In one case, it's put a face behind it, or it naturally emerges and evolves because that's how the brand is. In other cases, it's Bardstown to focus on the experience. Do everything right and modern from from the ground up, and you go there and you feel connected, even though you don't necessarily think of a face. You definitely feel like connected to the process, and good time. Good drinks, good whiskey. Definitely would buy it again. And then they do a lot of collaboration, so you kind of keep seeing them pop up, time and time again. So they're kind of touching you, that way as well.
It's hard
Yeah.
because I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead. I want to hear you first.
Well, it's hard because Jackie, and Marianne were two great people that helped elevate a brand, and then they leave, and so it's like, what do you do? They helped build up that brand, but then they leave, and you're left with you don't know what. And like I've had this conversation with CEOs and whatnot of in the industry, like, do you make distillers or tasters or this or that sign NDAs so that, or not NDAs, non-competes, because they really take everything, build it up, make themselves the face of it, and then they just leave. I don't know. I guess it depends on the personality of who you have running your operations. Like Bardstown, it's Steve Nally, who really doesn't care about being in the limelight. He's like, just, I'm going to go eat my lunch and don't bother me,
Drink his 4 old fashions for lunch and then go,
Right.
go
Eat
take
his
a nap.
huge charcuterie board and 4 old fashions. And,
That sounds good. That sounds like good lunch.
Yeah, he's a man. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
and-
That's tough.
And I was going to have a similar point. So I actually am glad you went first, because my point was it's risky to, if you're a small brand or maybe even a big brand, but it's risky to put all your eggs in the personality basket, because people leave as they should, and they should try different things. But so you see some of the distilleries having to shift away from a personality to an experience. And I think Castle and Key has done that really, really, really well. I mean, they have such a great experience when you go there now, and they pivoted real nicely. So it's a risk if you're small and you kind of hitch up to a personality.
Or as a kind of additional comment to that, in the cases where the personality is largely in ownership of the brand too, and they're catapulting the brand. I think of I think it's Brothers Bond, the two guys who were in I think it was the Vampire Diaries, 2 actors that started that brand. It's a 82 proof, something like that, pretty straightforward bourbon, but if you look at their following, it's tremendous. I mean, they have just an absolutely tremendous following on social media, and they've gotten so much attention in a very, very short period with what is a pretty basic bourbon product, but they've gotten that in front of so many people because they had the audience already at this point. So that's certainly, I'm sure helped them.
All those 18-year-olds drinking a lot of underage whiskey.
I think there's like 40 and 50-year-olds that follow them as well.
Oh, really? Well, it's that Ross and Squid magic,
That's all right. If you look at the socials, there's just a bunch of fire emojis on every single comment. So it's if we want to talk about, we'll save that for another discussion a little bit later. So
I think we hit a nerve with Kenny. I'd like to go through that a little more.
Double down on that one.
Yes, let's. Yeah. I think tonight's why there's no better time in the present, Kenny.
Kenny's been dropping the fire emojis on there, I think.
Yeah, you know me. That's all I try to do. Try to keep the hype train rolling around. But let's not talk about that. I don't want to talk too much about fake Instagram accounts. Instead, I want to talk a little bit about our second half of this, and that's kind of talking about barrel finishes. And this is because I feel in the past probably 2 to 3 years, we've seen barrel finishes really explode. We all know that, should I say, I feel that Angel's Envy was probably the first one that really catapulted barrel finishes into the mainstay, because for the most part, everybody said, "Oh, I love this bourbon called Angel's Envy." And a lot of us are like, well, it's not really a bourbon. It's actually a bourbon finish in port wine barrels and so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. But we've seen this now transcend to pretty much every single brand. There is not a single, should I say, not every single brand, but there are a lot of brands out there that are doing any type of wine finished, triple second champagne finished. I mean, you name it. There are a lot of different things that people are starting to experiment with. And that's great, because we've talked about this for a few years, saying that this is going to start pushing the bounds of what is a flavor profile, what is a bourbon. And I think for a lot of us, we're also kind of broadening our horizon of, okay, what are different flavors and things that we could look at? So I'm going to put it out to you all, is that why do you think we are so attracted to finished bourbons?
Ooh, I'll briefly go first. I think it's because we always want something new. Our palates get bored. We're always looking for something unique. The big guys make fantastic whiskey, but drinking the same mash bill in 10 different ricks with 10 different labels gets boring. And, doing the finishes or different experimentations or whatnot really, pushes your palate into new directions, and you experience these new flavors. At first, I was totally against it. I'm like, you're hiding something, you're trying to cover up a flaw or this or that. But what I've learned is that the people that do it well have really helped elevate the spirit. Now, I do think like some of the toasting, charring, and all this stuff has gone maybe a little too far, but done right, I think it's fantastic. But the wine finishes, I'm a big fan of. Like Foregate does a fantastic job. Blake is about to do a really fantastic job with. I'm sure this release is gonna be great.
Hopefully, let's see. We're on pins and needles waiting for it.
Trey has done a great job with finishing at Jefferson's. There's just so much flavor that can be brought out in the spirit that I think it's fun, and as a whiskey geek, you want new and interesting flavors.
And then I guess another question is, as a whiskey geek with all these new and interesting flavors, is it the point because you become kind of numb to a bunch of like wine finishes? Like, okay, we've had enough port. Like, what's next? I mean, is there a point where you just get a little bit of, just kind of bored of the same thing over and over?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's why Blake's finish is kind of interesting, because you kind of look again and you're like, what? But I feel like I have to try that. So many things in my collection taste very similar. Bourbon has that narrow kind of band of flavor, like Ryan talked about. So the finishing really expanded that, and I think it also draws people in who are familiar with something else already. They like rum, they haven't had whiskey. You give them something that's rum finished and they're like, okay, yeah, I could see myself getting into this. So I think it pulls people over to whiskey as well, which is really cool. And then they might start there, and then they're going the opposite direction, where then they're going to go find the purest stuff and get it, start to understand what it really means to be a bourbon. And unlike us who maybe started the other way, and now we're drawn maybe away from that to try new things, they're going to come in that way and then be drawn to bourbon. And it is, it's cool because it is, the thing that's made here in the United States. So we all kind of have that unique connection to bourbon that you can't really say the same about anything else. So it's kind of got that natural staying power, even though you get these deviations of unique finishes. There's still this kind of base bourbon element to it that we all feel connected to.
Let's definitely have Blake go last on this one. So
The king of finished bourbons.
The king of finished bourbons.
Justify his existence on this one.
I agree with all that. It's kind of looking for the next thing, and you kind of want to experiment. And so even I kind of see this as doing stupid things at home, like trying to fat wash your bourbon, which I did, and it was the worst thing I've ever concocted. I mean, I had to dump it. But it's things to try, and you see something that's, even the big guys try the orange curacao, and so you try it, and maybe not so good, and some gin ones I don't like because of all the botanicals, but you try those just to see what it's going to be like, because I think you guys are right. You've got house profiles from a lot of the big distilleries, so you want to just try something different. But Blake, that's all I got to say about it. I'm really interested in what you're going to say.
No, so I think we should get rid of all finishes completely. And no, I mean, my thinking on it is kind of aligned with Ryan, where you think about it 10, 15 years ago, what differentiation did we have in the industry? Proof, age, and distillery. And there were about 4 to 5 different distilleries making bourbon. So, yes, that has expanded, but I think just playing around with different blends and finishes is still something new. And yes, there's always a burnout, like, it's bound to happen where, and everything's not for everyone, but, like I've always said with these seal box finishes, we don't know what bourbon in a champagne barrel tastes like, because nobody's tried it. So maybe it's terrible. Maybe we never want to go back to it. But I always enjoy just, changing things up a little bit. And I still think it's going to be a small part of the category with all the different finishes. But at the end of the day, it's another ingredient in the blending process. And there's so many different ways to finish. Some people have so much residual liquid in there, you're basically just adding flavoring. Some people go dry barrels, and so it really highlights the blending aspect of things. And that's what I do really enjoy and like about it, is there is more craftsmanship to it than people think on the outset of it. So I'm all for people pushing things forward, and not to say that they're, if you just like straight bourbon, there's plenty of great options out there. But if you want to try something a little bit different, I think that's important to have people who are willing to do that as well.
I'm glad you said that, Blake, because it is an art. Like, we're playing with finishing and this and that. And I mean, you have to stay on top of it, and like, you have to taste it. You have to know exactly when to pull the wood, when it peaks and valleys. You could pull it too soon. It's like, I didn't realize, and I think just going through the process has made me realize, or gain much more of appreciation for it, that it's a true talent. It's a distilling and whatnot. It's, very scientific. It's a very repeatable process. Finishing is like, it's another variable that is a wild card that you have no idea what's going to happen. And so it's a huge risk, and the people that do it well, I have such great respect for. And so, and two, I think finishing stuff, and obviously we all like drinking and neat or on the rocks, but it makes some great cocktails, some interesting cocktails. It adds just that another depth of flavor, layer of flavor that, really pushes, like, makes a fun Manhattan or a fun old fashioned, that you just don't get out of a standard rye or bourbon mash bill.
But Ryan, did you like the Tabasco finished in Bloodies?
Oh, I did. I've had the Dickel. I actually did like that for the.
Did you?
The hot Dickel?
Yeah, the hot Dickel.
I had kind of like that too, Ryan. That was good for cocktails. We'll say that the craft beer scene kind of shows that, like, there seems to be no shortage of demand for trying different things. There's always something new, and I always feel like I want to grab one of the new different craft beers that's out there, a lot of one-off runs and things like that. So it makes sense that would translate over to bourbon as well.
So, question for Blake: if you said you don't know what it's going to taste like, so it could be awful, do you then finish it in something else, or to try to fix it, or do you release it?
So it's honestly a risk, if I've had a drink, so I'll be more honest than I normally would. But
Well, have
no, I
another
mean,
drink then, and let's be real
it
honest though.
it is a little scary of a process playing around with some of those, because you're dumping a lot of money in bourbon into these barrels and saying like, look, I think this is going to work out. And that's like the seal box approach. And a lot of money to me is like what Beam or one of the big guys probably spends in printer paper in a week. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like, hey, if it doesn't work out, we'll put it in something else, and we won't use it in this blend, has always been my approach. We've gotten extremely lucky, I think, on a lot of ours, but that's just the risk. I'm not going to throw something out there and just be like, hey, it is what it is. If you like it, great. If you don't, I want it to taste good and kind of also tell that same story. So it's a high risk, high reward, I guess. But yeah, that's always the approach I've looked at it.
And to kind of dovetail onto a few things that have been said there is that as you start thinking about a lot of barrel finishes that are out there on the market and who they're coming from the producer side, because there are some bad actors out there. Don't get me wrong. There are going to be some people that are recharging barrels or just throwing flavors in, and you don't know what's going on there. And you look at the label and it's got 14 different flavors on it. You're like, there's no way you were able to finish in all these different kinds of barrels. So it's really kind of hard, not only just to look from a bad actor perspective, and that might come from sort of a brand that's maybe lesser known versus one that is, very well known. But there is another great comment that came in the chat earlier is that some people said that finishing is a great way to just cover up a young whiskey. And it's kind of true to a degree too, is that you can take some of these, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years that still have not yet to mature and really make that turn, but you can finish it, you can double barrel it, you can toast it. And a lot of these methods are something that kind of pushes it over that next edge that you don't sit there and need to wait until it is going to kind of hit that maturity point. So there is sort of a risk factor when you're looking at where you're going to purchase and where you're going to get it from. And so understanding of you should probably read Breaking Bourbon's website on every single review, so you actually know exactly what kind of went into this. Like, what do these guys think? Because I really think that you have to have sort of your bearings on, only because there's so much out there on the market that you can get caught flat-footed, and you're not really going to know what you're going to be having, because there might be some brand you're like, oh, it's got some finish on it, or it's got this, it's a honey barrel, because God forbid everybody's got a honey barrel nowadays. And so at that point, you have to be kind of careful and be cautious of where you're spending your dollars, because you're probably going to get burned at some point too.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes,
You gotta remember
Yeah, no,
it's-
I mean, I think that's kind of a part of it, unfortunately, and that's where I wish the TTB would come down with a little bit stricter. So anytime something goes into a secondary barrel, it's basically a spirit specialty. So, or just distilled spirit specialty, whatever that category is. So that's encompassing of a lot of things, and I wish there were a true finishing barrel category to make sure it's just straight bourbon, straight rye, whatever it may be, finished in X barrel with less than whatever amount of residual liquid and flavoring, because you don't want that. And that's where it's kind of the Wild West. But ultimately, that comes down to, do you trust the producer? Do you trust your own palate? I think we've all had plenty of finishes where you taste it and you're like, there's just no way this got to this level of sweetness and everything else without some help from outside of that barrel. But yeah, so it's trial and error as a consumer as well.
That kind of brings up a question. I just shared an article in the chat too, kind of to Kenny's point and talking about this and what labels say. But we discussed the idea of producers labeling something, for example, straight bourbon finished in XYZ, for example, there's a lot of discussion of whether straight bourbon should even be on that because it is a distilled spirit specialty. So there's some that would say, I think you're kind of maybe hurting that straight bourbon name because there's going to be confusion because it at one point was straight bourbon, but now who knows what you've done to it and you haven't really had to disclose that versus the other side of it, which is, well, I have some basis of what straight bourbon tastes like. And so knowing that it's that and not just whiskey, which could be anything, I want to know more about what's in there. So I don't know if you guys have kind of thoughts on how you like that labeling to read when you see these kind of finishes. Do you like more detail or do you like kind of leave that bourbon name, leave straight bourbon out of it?
It's a good question.
Ooh, that's a great question.
I would probably lean to leave straight bourbon out of it, even though, well, it's kind of like you have to have these pillars, right? You have pillars, and you say like, what does a bucket fit into, or or should I say buckets, and like, what does this fit into? And of course, if you have straight bourbon, well, it's still straight bourbon, and then it becomes something else. Is it still straight bourbon? Well, it's technically a straight bourbon before it started. I kind of feel that what they have right now with inside of the TTB regulations and the rules that it's pretty well aligned. And I do agree that the way that they have it inside of the TTTBM to say that if you are going to say you have to have straight bourbon finished in XYZ, blah, 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 it all has to be the same font size, the same font type, and it all has to be the same kind of way. Like you just can't say straight bourbon and then in .02 font way underneath of it, finished in blah, 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 blah. So I feel that they have done a good job of being able to kind of classify, or should I say, be able to put that on the label so consumers can see that. However, for some reason, the general consumer still doesn't know or doesn't care because I'll go and ask my uncle what his favorite bourbon is, and he'll say Angel's Envy. And I'll have to go ahead and say, well, it's not technically not a bourbon, blah, blah, blah. But that is kind of how it all ends up being. But I do think that it's just marketing at that point. Like if somebody just does a great job of marketing, they're able to kind of get past that boundary. You get past that, even if it's a stigma, because some people just don't care about it. They built an amazing brand on port finished whiskey and port finished bourbon, and they've been able to kind of ride that and keep it going.
Yeah, I totally agree on the font size. I've just seen too many that the biggest words are straight bourbon whiskey and then finished in some whatever it is really small. So that's got to be the key. It's got to be transparency on really all of these things that we've been talking about tonight. Whether it's the historical stuff, making things up, or what they're doing, what the process are, what the marketing is, what you're finished in. It's all about transparency. That's where I'm going to come down.
Yep. Well, I'm just waiting to see bourbon finished and margaritas because that's gonna be the next thing because we're gonna need it now that margaritas are taking over. All right, there was one last question that I saw on here from JR, and I just want to kind of put it out there as a quick one that says, "How do you feel about double oak and toasted oak popularity? Is it here to stay?"
No, after the barrel shortage, right? I mean, you're wasting those barrels.
True. They can't toast their second double barrel anything anymore.
That's right. But other than that, I mean, I'm a fan still. So I say keep them coming.
Yeah, I think the toast to me is I in general, won't say every time, but in general, like the profile that it adds. So do I want to see every distillery and brand have a toasted series? I don't know, maybe not, but maybe so too, because each product's different. It's going to interact differently with the toast. There's so many different levels that you can use on the toast. So I think that's one that's going to be here to stay. Michter's kind of kicked that thing off pretty well back in, what was that, 2016-ish, with their toasted barrel series, and I fell in love with it ever since then. So I hope it's one that's here to stay. I think it adds a different level of taste without getting too outside of what we think of as bourbon. Some of the wine and rum and whatever it may be finishes can get a little funky, but if you want to say true bourbon profiles, just amped up a little bit, caramelization, that kind of stuff, the toasted and double oak is a good way to go.
And if the producers just want to throw money away and just not just use one barrel, but use two. Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
No, it's
think.
risky. I mean, it's risky
Yeah, how
too because
expensive is that?
it might make it worse. You know, you're gonna pay
Not
you know,
much. A
to do
barrel's
it
like
more.
$250.
But your time and energy to do all that, and you know, you're gonna lose some along the way too, potentially. I don't know. I'm drinking a red line toasted right now, and it's very
You
good.
see, you're part of the
So,
problem, Nick.
it's very good. So what can I say? I like it.
Yeah. Golly, you just fell right into that, didn't you? No, I think Toasted's here to stay. And we've talked to Andrew Weebrink from ISC and everybody else that's are in the cooperage ecosystem. And a lot of them are trying even more crazier ways to do types of barrels, and people are going to finish them in different kinds of things. I think this is just still going to be the beginning of what it is. Even though we talked about some wild things, I have yet, I don't think we've seen the wildest thing yet. And we'll see what 2023 brings us in the future. But we'll go ahead.
We'll see what Blake comes up with.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, God, triple second champagne, why not?
Yeah, we got something real big for 2023. So
Well, I'll be waiting on the edge of our seat for that one. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. But I do want to give a shout out real quick to Michael Brown, who says he's been listening to us ever since episode 1. And this is the first time he's ever tuned in live. And he's had his mind blown by seeing our faces in real time as we're speaking here. So really cool to kind of see that happen. But let's go ahead. We'll wrap it up the same way we got started. So Nick, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so great as always, great chat, great comments. Nick with Breaking Bourbon. Check us out, breakingbourbon.com. All the socials at Breaking Bourbon. And cheers, y'all.
All right. And Brian.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I really did enjoy this. As always, though, with number 70, Brian with Sipping Corn and Bourbon Justice. Find me at either of those places. Great time, guys.
Bourbon Justice. I really wish you had a TV show. I mean, you should be.
Let's do one.
Why not?
I just need a producer and money.
Yeah. Who's the judge, though? I guess that's what we need to figure out.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, let me think on that.
We'll figure that one out.
Yeah.
And Blake, wrap it up.
yeah, I'm Blake from Sealbox and Bourboner. So always fun to be here. Thanks again. Thanks for letting me plug our crazy fun experiments we have going on. So find me at all the Sealbox and Bourboner Instagrams, Facebooks, websites, all the good stuff. Thanks again.
For sure. And Ryan got bored, so he left. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you all once again for joining on. We had about 120 people at one point concurrently watching this. So we're probably a little bit over 200 in and out. So it's great to see all the interaction, people commenting everywhere. So thank you so much for coming in, being a part of this live action as we kind of talk about a good potpourri of bourbon topics. But make sure you follow all these guys on all the socials. Follow Bourbon Pursuit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all those great places, and subscribe and tell a friend, leave a review, all those great things. Hit the thumbs up buttons, smash it, whatever the kids say nowadays. But with that, let's go ahead. We'll close it out. Thank you all once again, and we'll see you all next week. All right.
That was a good one.
That was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pursuit
we
after
hit a
hours.
lot of
Always is.
good
I hadn't even
topics there.
seen that article till you sent it around, Kenny.
Yeah, I saw somebody from who was it? Brandon from BBC had shared it, and I read it, and I mean, part of me was like, "Yes, exactly. This is what I've been trying to say. Nobody cares, but you got to
say they don't care, but then you go and you look at all the people taking tours around here.
Well,
it's a different story.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're dealing with the 1% of bourbon drinkers who are burned out by the historical thing, but for every one of us, there's probably 98 people who are like, oh wow, I'm gonna drink at Woodford. They were one of the only places that were up and running through the during Prohibition, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, sure it was.
It's like however you get into bourbon, it's fine and it's good. But yeah, the historical side gets old after a while, I would think.
Yeah, Brandon had a nice.
No pun intended.
Brandon had a nice quote in that article. Is one thing actually, Brian, you and I were talking about it, that just the name Bardstown Bourbon Company, just naming the company such a simple name. I mean, Bardstown in and of itself has a lot of history, and they've kind of really like zeroed in on that name, you know. So when you think anyone talks about Bardstown, there's going to be an automatic kind of link back. So if you talk about the history of Bardstown, like they
Immediate
have that
credibility.
connection, but don't like it's just because they're
Yeah.
there and
It's kind of
they took
brilliant.
the name.
Yeah.
You know, they never have to say that.
Right.
I mean,
At
it's so
first I thought
simple,
it-
but it's fucking
at
genius.
first I thought it was the worst name ever. I mean, why would you do that? And now that's what you think of. So it's
Well, because
Mhm.
for a
shows you
while,
that
I
they're
mean, everybody.
geniuses.
I think even Heaven Hill was pushing Bardstown as the bourbon capital of the world, and all of the all of that went around, and they're like, oh, we can actually play on that a little bit, but I do like what they've done. So
We'll just let everybody do our marketing for us.
Yeah. And anyone who ever says the word Bardstown is now marketing for us. I mean, it's genius.
that's why I named my next release the Cecil and Coleman seal box release.
Yeah. I mean, mine's
So
all
let's
tied
talk
up in-
about that Bourbon Pursuit. What'd you guys call it? The rare character one with the psychedelic,
No, the acid trip
picture.
one.
the acid trip one.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked it.
That's kind of what your intro kind of reminded me of.
Yeah, I'm working on making everybody like getting into psychedelics. That's what's next, Ray.
Watch
Although-
out what's on that label of that Pursuit United, the next one.
Yeah, that is what I love about DC is like people are like, oh man, there's a ton of protests going on, and then you go to DC and it's like make psychedelics legal. It's like no, they're on their whole other thing up there.
Well, what was that? I mean, that is like a real thing now because I was listening to something and like as marijuana is starting to get more legalized, and now there's a push for mushroom legalization,
like psilocybin and
yeah, like there's an actual real push for it, and I mean we're years away from it, knowing that we are even years away from having marijuana be domestically legal, but I saw it and I was like, oh geez, that's hardcore.
Yeah, our kids aren't going to be drinking bourbon. I hate to tell everybody that, but we got like a solid 10-ish to 10 to 15 years, and then
It's been a good run, fellas.
We got to work on our corn marketing a little bit better then, don't we?
yeah,
We'll really be the old guys then.
Yeah, there we
One
go.
day.
BreakingBud.com. We got to get 2 steps.
Yeah, there you go.
go ahead and lock that URL in now.
Yeah, you got to register that now.
Yeah, that
I'm
was
pretty
actually
sure butter is already gone, BUDR, but I'm in trouble. I'm obsolete.
That's awesome.
Mushroomser.com.
Yeah. Mushroomer.com.
Hey,
All
that's
right,
the Shroomer.
I'm out. I got to go to bed. I'm tired, but
Oh,
enjoyed it,
good.
guys. This is
you,
fun.
man.
My wife, whenever I was going to set up, she was like, "Man, I feel like you haven't done one of these in a long time." I'm like, "No, I feel like I just haven't done one at the house in a long time. Like I've been traveling and gone." Oh, actually, I'll stay.
Cecil.
Ryan's back.
Oh, Cecil gets him to stay.
Ryan, nope. Got to figure out those AirPods.
Got to connect to the test.
All right, are we done?
No, we were saving the last question. So, no, just kidding.
Blake said he's on for an hour longer because you came back. So
Oh,
Yeah,
we're all
yeah.
gonna
awesome.
jump on
Now-
YouTube.
Well, sorry
was
about that.
The question is, if you had to be a peanut butter, which would it be, crunchy or smooth?
Ooh,
If you had to be a Ross and Squib, would you be a Ross or a Squib?
squid,
Maybe squid.
definitely.
He's
If
a
you could be
squib.
both, which one would you pick?
Crunchy and smooth.
That's how I know this thing is taking a nosedive. All right, I'm
Yeah.
out.
Glad I came
See y'all.
back.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Sorry, son was having an episode.
Is it okay? Because I know
I
talked
think
about
so.
earlier.
Yeah, he had a fever, like a low grade fever today, and then he just been kind of sleeping. Then he just woke up kind of like with a nightmare or something. I don't know. It was
Ooh.
crazy.
Jeez.
my son just had like 2 days of fevers and like no other symptoms, just real tired fevers.
Yeah.
Other friends have been having something similar too.
Yeah, he just had like a dream where he couldn't wake up. Like he was just like
Couldn't
screaming.
snap out of it. Yeah.
And I was like we were trying to get him to, he finally came to, but it was kind of scary for a second. It's like,
Jeez.
we're right here, you know,
Yeah.
but he's okay now.
It's like
Good.
a Stranger Things thing. Just like,
Yeah.
oh, you probably never seen Stranger Things.
I've seen the first season. Then I
Oh,
got
okay.
bored after
How
that.
about the last one that just came out that was like their eyes were all like gray and rolling back and doing all this stuff. They couldn't wake up from their dreams.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened.
And like that's what Kevin said. He says fever terrors, real thing.
Yeah,
True fact.
true fact. Well, sounds like y'all closed it out real well. Good for
We
me,
did.
so.
Yeah. Give us the outro so Lauren can record it.
Toodles.
Hey, I will say I did a maker's pick today.
Yeah, how was that?
Blew my mind. Way better
Really?
than
Blew your mind.
than the first 2 times I'd been. I don't know is because we had a maker's diplomat that was our kind of person that showed us around. We didn't even do the thing in the cave, like where you usually go. Have you ever been? They've got a whole like house that overlooks the lake that feeds all their water, and like that's where you do it at. Have you been to it?
No, I've only been
Oh,
to
I
the
mean,
I haven't been there for that.
I was
I haven't been.
Oh.
it was still a incredibly long experience. That's just kind of what they're known for. But it was really good this time because typically you go and you sit down for lunch and then he's usually at like Star Hill, but they used to kind of give you a sandwich and then you would go and you'd go through the tour and then you go do the blending and then you have to go and put your staves on the ring and then you have to fill the barrel and whatever. So we didn't do any of that this time. Well, we did some of that, but not all of that. So we got there and now, of course, Star Hill is like a sit down, nice, fancy kind of restaurant. So it was a 3-course meal already prepared. Didn't even have to order anything. It all came out. So you had like charcuterie board first, and they brought out the main course, and they brought out the dessert. But you got a cocktail while you're there, and it was, of course, all very good. And then after that, we, took us to a few different places, kind of look around and see some things that I'd never even seen before. And some other art installations and kind of things that they have kind of poking up around there. And then we hop on one of their like super powered electric golf carts and start taking us all around the campus till we finally get to the building where they have the it's super nice. You open the door, you look in. I sent a video to Ryan earlier of this kind of like I don't even know how to describe it, but just a very awesome inside of a building, probably 20-foot ceilings. And it's just super modern, well done, tufted couches, all this sort of stuff. And then you do the blending experience. But like I said, you're looking out over the balcony across their huge ass lake. And it's like there's a commercial kitchen, like all this other kind of stuff. So you're just kind of doing it there. After you get done with the blending experience, then they took us to the warehouse and we got to thieve barrel proof directly from the warehouse. They just had a barrel. Yeah. I was like, we've never got to thieve from makers directly out of the barrel before. So yeah, we got to go and do that too. And then we got to go and kind of wrap up with some of the end of the stuff. And then we go to the gift shop and you get $100 stipend to go get whatever you want out of the gift shop.
Oh, wow.
Did you give me a hat?
Yeah.
Sorry. I used my 100 on 2 shirts. So
Thanks a lot.
hey, it's what you get for not showing up. It's your penance.
Selfish.
But I did send those pictures to you because they looked like really cool hats, and I was like, we should make hats like these.
I know. I thought that meant you were going to give me one.
I'm running a timeline on that. What's like?
Oh, he was there for
time
12
for that?
hours.
Oh, dude, yeah, I was there from the day actually started by going to Justin's House of Bourbon and drinking some 1986 makers on their dime.
As
right?
part of their
On the maker's
experience?
dime as part of the experience.
Part of the experience.
Really?
See?
Will they shuttle you around or like what's the?
Yeah. Then you hop in the minivan that the diplomat had for us, and we kind of went off on our way. So, I mean, like I said, night and day difference from what I've experienced before. So it was pretty awesome to say the least.
The bad thing about
That's pretty
makers
cool.
is you got 3 hours in drive time from Louisville, no matter
Yeah.
what.
Yeah, we left at 10:30. We didn't get back till 6:30. So it was a full day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But-
that's long.
Like I said, it was a
It's
a
good
pretty
work if you can get it.
sounds fun though. Yeah, sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could do that. I would have
Yeah.
done it, but my
I
kid
wish-
got sick.
I wish I could have, but if there was an opening spot when Ryan couldn't do it and no one else could do it, I guess I'd do it. But...
All right. Well,
Hey, I'll be at your house this week, Brian.
Will you? Sweet.
Spraying Bermuda. Yep.
God, I got Bermuda freaking everywhere, man.
I know. Let's kill it.
Let's kill it. Kill it dead.
Ryan, I was going to ask you, how was Colorado?
Oh, it was incredible.
Yeah?
I loved it. In the summer, man, it's nice. You every morning you wake up, it's like 50, 60 degrees, and then
Mhm.
the high is like 75, 80, no humidity. It's just the mountains do something to your soul. I don't know. It's like being out there. Maybe it gets old after a while, but for a week, it's magical. And then
I'm with you on that.
we rode. It's the first time I ever rode horses up in the mountains, but my kids have been taking lessons, and like I was kind of not scared, but I'm just like, okay, it's a big animal, going up these hills, and then it was just amazing watching them like be in control, of them. But that was pretty cool too, like just being on an animal that can climb up these steep grades and these tiny trails, and it was pretty spectacular. I had a great time. Then I got to go to Fort Collins again.
Yeah.
And Luis, the CEO, took me. He's the only CEO I know that will take off on a Friday to take somebody else's family on his pontoon and take them tubing. So he took off
that's
work
awesome.
Friday, took us
Luis
to his
is
lake.
awesome,
Nice.
man.
He took us to his
he was
lake,
great.
this lake, and with my kids and stuff. And he's like, whatever y'all want to do, we'll go tubing. This that. I don't know. It's like he's such a great guy. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
whole Old Elk experience is really awesome.
Yeah, that was cool walking through there. Everyone in the town just, hey,
Yeah,
just
Fort
like
Collins is
everybody-
really cool in the summer.
Everybody
too.
knew each other. Yeah, I imagine it was probably pretty nice right now.
Yeah, I'd go back for sure. And you were just there, Brian, Colorado?
This past week, I was in Estes Park.
Yeah, so that's not too far from Fort Collins.
Yeah, it was a good
Nice.
time. Hiked every day. Only went up to 12 once above the tree line, but rest of the day is mostly between 8 and 10.
Nice. We took the gondolas up and hiked down with kids. They whine after like a tenth of a mile.
Kids will whine.
Yeah,
Now, this was
good thing the
this
hiking was down.
The gravity, just let gravity do half the work.
Now, this was our first test on empty nesting because our daughter's in Chicago this summer and our son's away for 5 weeks. So we took just me and her trip, Mississippi.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Have you come to like a realization that that's going to happen? Or you
That's
feeling
real.
it?
So
Yeah.
the boy is an upcoming senior in high school. So next year it'll be real.
So what's the grand plan then? Are you like, you got to?
Start a bourbon distillery.
That's I would say with 2 bedrooms you could do that now.
Yeah, I think so.
You got deep pockets.
Yeah.
Well, you can be
Relying
writing
on
checks
some
to,
funding
to
from
the
the
universities, right?
I'm gonna start
There's that.
Patreon and I'm gonna fund a distillery.
We'll see how far it goes. I'll give you $5.
Yeah, I'll donate a couple bucks.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
spray your
for sure.
Bermuda,
Sweet.
your distillery.
Just keep that Bermuda dead, and I'm happy.
Right
Make
on.
it happen for free legal
Oh.
advice.
Sweet, you got
I'm
it.
kidding.
That's what he's here
All
for.
right, fellas. I think I'm gonna.
All right,
All right,
I'm out
see you,
too.
Nick and
This was
Brian.
fun.
Great to see you
Great
all.
seeing y'all.
Yep.
Hope to
Yep.
see you in person soon.
Let's
Definitely.
do it again.
Both of
All
you.
All
right.
right, guys. Yep.
Y'all
Bye-bye.
talk. See y'all later. Thank you everybody else for tuning in.